From Built It Productions, it's The Great Creators. Conversations about creativity with some of the most celebrated actors, musicians, and performers of our time. I'm Guy Raz, and on the show today, rock icon Billy Idol.
We were these cast-off kids who'd found the other 10 people who were like us. And it was music that was connecting us. Were we thinking this was going to go mega? No. No. We were doing it out of the love of doing it. This is what we believed in. We were going to do it whether there was a future or not.
You can't really tell the story of punk rock in America or the story of MTV without mentioning Billy Idol. He had that look, spiky, bleached blonde hair, leather jackets, chains, and, of course, his curled lip. And he had the sound. He combined punk and rock, dance, even disco to write hits like White Wedding, Rebel Yell, and, of course, Dancing with Myself. That combination made Billy Idol one of the first and biggest stars of the MTV era. And today he'll take us through his whole journey and open up about his very rock and roll lifestyle. Plus, the workout regimen that allows him to go on world tour at the age of 68, and the story behind the hit Rebel Yell. It involves the Rolling Stones and a lot of bourbon. That's all coming up after this break. Hey, before we bring Billy in, two things. First, there is some adult language in this conversation in case you're listening with kids nearby, just a heads up. And one more thing, later in the conversation, you'll hear Billy open up about his drug use many years ago, and he's pretty candid about enjoying certain aspects of that lifestyle. But I should say that off-air, Billy asked us to make it clear that in no way is it meant to glorify or advocate hard drug use. All right, so with all that said, enjoy my conversation with Billy Idol. Billy Idol was born William Michael Albert Broad in 1955, right outside of London. When he was a toddler, though, his family moved temporarily to the United States.
Oh, my first memories are American. I mean, I had New York Yankee pajamas and, we have home movies that we took. So a lot of my memories are, they're as if it's a home. It's the Zapruder film. Everything looks like the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
That Kodak color, So, my first memories were I had an American accent. That's the first. I don't remember having an English accent. I had to.
Can you do an American accent even
when I lived
in?
Of course, I did. I mean, once you're watching Disney, all the English were fops. I mean, they were showing you the American Revolution, the revolutionary time period, and of course, all fighting the English. So the last thing I wanted to be when I was at school was British. So I watched all the cowboy films, and I would go to school in Long Island talking as if I'm from Texas, thinking that's how everybody spoke in America. Because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be. So I very quickly got an American accent, and my first memories are of America, of Long Island, really, of those kind of blistering summers with the sun, and then, the blizzards and hurricanes in the winter and stuff, And also the air raid sirens, the nuclear bomb warning sirens. And so I remember things like that, very clearly. I remember those summers and those winters and everything, America. Yeah, it's my first memories are America.
Billy, you grew up at a time, and certainly in Britain, where it was this kind of a stiff upper lip time. How would you describe your parents in their relationship with you? Were they warm and loving, or were they more kind of standoffish?
Well, my mother was Irish for a start, and super warm. I mean, Mum's super social. She just and she's a lovely person. She's very sort of loving, and Dad was too, really. But he was a bit more British, a bit more reserved. You're right. There was my dad had a little bit of that British reserve. That we kind of know is a British characteristic. But he wasn't cold or anything like that. He was a very loving, warm person, really. I mean, I was lucky. It was only just when I got into music and later on and maybe puberty and stuff that started having problems with my parents and stuff. But my early childhood, I remember it was, it's lovely, really. I mean, I was lucky. I had really lovely parents.
Yeah. He had a business, and he would have you work for the business. What did he do?
Well, Dad did it. He's a salesman, initially. He's actually a cost and works accountant. That's what he'd done at college and university. And but then he'd gone on to initially at the time, just before he went to America, he worked slotted angle. He was selling slotted angle shelving, and stuff like that. And before that, he'd sold typewriters. And then he became, when he went to America, he became sales manager of Blue Point Laundry on Long Island. And then we came back to Britain, and he sold medical equipment, like a barometer, the pressure, the blood pressure machine, which used to be on the wall in every doctor's office. So Dad was a great salesman. And then later on, he started his own business where he sold power tools. He hired and buyed power tools, and he had a ladder hire. So I did work for him, especially that summer of 76 when I was, about to join Chelsea and start Generation X. And I was working at my dad's thing in the daytime and then going up from Charlton and going just across the River Thames up north to rehearse with Chelsea and stuff. So I worked for them that summer, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and Chelsea, I think your fans will know, was sort of the first band you joined before Generation X. I'm curious because just before you did that, because it was sort of around 76 when your sort of rock and roll life began. But you were a college student. You went to the University of Sussex in Brighton in 75. So I have to imagine you were actually a pretty decent student in school, because it wasn't a time where every kid went to college, and certainly not in the environment that you grew up in.
Well, me and my friends, we believed in the music revolution that was going on. We were very much following that wherever I lived.
Yeah.
The friends I had, we were super into music. That's what we were into. And so me carrying on education was purely to avoid working, so that I had time to be in a group. My mum even said to me, she died a couple of years ago in 20, but, she said a couple of years before she died, she said, why did you do English literature at university? That's well, I thought it would help with writing lyrics, Mum. She sort of went, that's what you were doing. Yeah, of course, I was dreaming about being in a group because music, acting was incredible, but the coolest thing to be was in a band. That's what it was in the 60s and 70s. It's now acting. Acting kind of took over in the 80s or 90s or whatever. It's acting now, But back when I was young, the thing to be was be in a band, And we were just super into music. And music was sort of like, it's what gave you hope. Watching sort of the groups we loved. And right from 6 years old, I fell in love with the Beatles and I loved the Stones and the Animals and them and the Who and we were watching all the music. There was a Ready Steady Go, this music program on Friday on The Weekend Starts Here was the slogan, and it had they had live Ready Steady Beatles, Ready Steady Who, Ready Steady Stones. They also had all the soul acts from America live. Sometimes they're miming, but sometimes they'd be live. Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Benny King. Yeah. So you watch it, we're just like drinking it in. We're just drinking music in from anything you saw. You just drank it in.
When you started playing guitar, because you started as a kid. I mean, you started in your
I actually started to play the drums when I was 7, but I didn't really have a full kit. I just had a kick drum, which had a pedal, and then I used to pretend the bed was the snare. And then when I was about 10, I realised, Ringo's at the back,
Yeah.
And John and Paul are writing all the songs. So you really need to play a guitar and you want to be at the front singing, Because that's what I was, that's what I was really, really excited about was the music revolution that was going on.
Tell me about, I think this was a hugely pivotal moment in your life. You were young. I mean, you were probably 21 and you went and saw the Sex Pistols in London. I mean, this is like Anarchy in the UK comes out, and this song kind of blows your mind when you when you first hear it, right?
Yeah, well, the thing about the Pistols was they started to write their own songs. Initially they were doing all covers, and then they started to write their own songs. I think Pretty Vacant, I heard. Well, they were doing a couple of their own songs. I didn't quite realise, they had Lazy Sod and 17, I think. But then suddenly they did Pretty Vacant, which was fantastic. And then, of course, Anarchy in the UK, and you just realise that all these guys are not only our age and are sort of learning to play their instruments on stage, basically, which was exciting to us because there'd been this period in rock through the late 60s where, you had to be this incredible musician. The people in Led Zeppelin were like session guys, They were great, great, great music. John Paul Jones, They were session cats in some ways, a lot of those guys, and it was just the level of musicianship was so high that you started to think you could never do it. And then that was the great thing about listening to the Velvet Underground, and then later on the New York Dolls, and then later on the music from CBGBs in 1974, the Ramones and stuff. You realise there are other people that they weren't following Led Zeppelin and people like that. They were going back to how rock and roll had started and how simple it was, primitive in a way, and sort of refining the spirit of rock and roll. And so we were really following that. And in a way, that sort of opened us up to, you don't have to be the greatest musician. And most of those guys, when the Beatles started out, they weren't the greatest musicians. They were learning as they went. I mean, that's what they were doing in Hamburg for hours upon hour, playing 8 hours a night. They were really learning their instrument, learning to be in a band, learning to be on stage, everything. And so the Pistols were kind of like, oh man, here we are. Other people like us, same age, same kind of age group, not that great at playing their instruments yet, but you could tell they're going to be good, and they're really good enough for what we were looking for, because it was this idea that you didn't have to be so incredible a musician. You could learn as you went, and that's kind of what they opened up a number of doors, them and the Clash in lots of ways. And the music bands in America, as I say, the CBGB's band, Blondie, Ramones, Talking Heads. I think they're all people who were learning to play as they went, really. That's the feeling we got, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, how the fuck can we get into this?
Yeah.
And so not only be fans of the music revolution, but be pushing the music revolution along.
Yeah. I love this idea that, you had a bunch of friends, you were all into music, and you see the Sex Pistols essentially turn music on its head, because up until that point, the perception was you had to be this great musician like, Jimmy Page, or, you had to be an incredible guitar player. And all of a sudden, here guys, they're not great musicians, but they're making music that's so relevant, that's having such a massive cultural impact.
Yeah, saying things that needed to be said, for our generation.
Yeah.
Here was people our age now saying what we believed and what was happening to us. Because a lot of the musicians, they'd all gone to America, and, they weren't really singing about what was happening to young people in Britain anymore. They were singing about, I don't know, being in the Dakota building surrounded by whiteness. I don't know. But we were sort of like kids who we were dealing with the economic sort of situation in England, which was like fucking terrible. There was a terrible depression. America was depressed in the mid-70s, and if America's depressed, Britain is fucked. And I can't imagine what Ireland's like, because if Britain's fucked, Ireland's really had it. So we were sort of dealing with that, really. And also, everybody was fighting whatever government was. It's not so different from how America is becoming now.
No, it's not.
That's what it was like back in the sort of 70s and 80s. It's a little bit, this kind of just, the way people are now, very angry, and feeling that they're not, the future isn't there. In America, Americans are starting to talk about that. Well, I don't believe that. I think that America is still a great country and there is a massive future here. But that's kind of a very similar things I'm seeing now. It's funny how America's almost 20 years behind. Whatever happens to Britain, it happens to America 20 years later, it seems like. And so people in the 70s, the whole, the unions were fighting whatever government was in control. And then we were sort of, we were kind of the people who were inheriting this broken system. That's what was, and they were handing us nothing. If you went to if the jobs guy at school or something, if you went to talk to him, he's basically telling you there aren't any jobs. It doesn't matter if you're a college grad or you've left school at 14. There's no jobs. That's what he's telling you. Forget it. Forget it. There is no future. So the Pistols singing "There's no future." It was true for us, and so we were sort of like having to carve out our lives really, and one way we could sort of be the newspaper for our generation was music. That's kind of what we were doing. We were like the punk rock music was kind of the newspaper, the news items for our generation. Then some people even took it to where they did fanzines, and that was the kind of, talking about, we were sort of writing them, what was happening to us in music, but also the headlines of what was happening to us were in the song titles,
When you got into music, Billy, you see the Pistols. You are a musician, and the first band that you helped create is Chelsea, and then not that long after you formed Generation X with Bob Andrews and John Toe. And did you imagine at that time that this would be like a career? Because the Sex Pistols were big, they were a big band. And, did you imagine that you would form a band and all of a sudden you would also have this big audience? Or what did you think being in a band would mean for you? Was it a permanent life thing? Was it, just we'll see what happens?
No, the punk rock thing was like, we didn't expect that to go big, mega. There's hardly anybody into it. Like the people, we were like this, we were these cast off kids who'd found the other 10 people who were like us, or the other 20, or maybe in England there was 200 people who were like us, or maybe 500 throughout the whole country. And there's, in lots of ways, it was music that was connecting us, and say fashion, and Vivienne Westwood's store, Malcolm McLaren's store, Sex became a kind of a place that became a bit of a nodal point for what was going on. But most people, you only really, no, we didn't think anything was going to happen. We were saying to each other, look, if this lasts 6 months, great. If it lasts a year, fantastic. 2 years, great. But then what happened was the Pistols did put out a record. So we kind of, you can make, in the States, the CBGB's bands were starting to make records. So we did see, you can make records. I remember Little Johnny Jewel, the television song, they put out a white label. So it's like, maybe you even have to somehow make your own record, which we did do at one point. We bootlegged ourselves and made out it was an illegal record, but it was really us bootlegging ourselves. You had to really think out of the box. But a lot of it was, we didn't think it was going to last at all. And then suddenly the Pistols, because they had Anarchy in the UK out as a single, I think Queen were going to be on this TV magazine program that was on at 6:00 in the evening called South by Southwest or something like that. I can't remember what it was called, but Bill Grundy was the host. And the Queen couldn't do it, so the Pistols did it. And then the Pistols swore, the man, Bill Grundy, kind of got the Pistols to kind of say, I think Johnny said shit, and then after that, Jonesy started just saying to Bill Grundy, "You're a rotter. You're a fucking rotter. You're a fucking piece of shit." Just started to say whatever because they don't give a shit. That's the thing about Jonesy. He doesn't give a fuck. And of course, there was some lorry driver somewhere in England, truck driver, who saw this and put his boot through his television or threw a brick through it. And then, so the next day in the British newspapers, all the evening newspapers and the daily news, there's only 3 or 4 newspapers, so most people read the same news, Well, it was the filth and the fury, and then punk just exploded. Every kid in England wanted to be a punk rocker because it was like, wow, this is the most rebellious thing you could be. But up until that point, were we thinking this was going to go mega? No. No, the last thing we thought. We were doing it out of the love of doing it. This is what we believed in. We were going to do it whether there was a future or not. Because they were telling us there's no fuck. Yeah. They were telling us there's no future for you. So in that case, We're going to do the thing we love. That's what we thought, And some other people, we were saying, all right, if you're not into music, be a photographer. You could pick up a camera and take pictures of the scene, maybe, or make clothes, or make your own clothes. Sort of, it's all do it yourself. That's what we were all about. But no, were we think it was going to go mega? No, we weren't. No, the last thing we thought, and then kaboom, it went. So no, I wasn't thinking of a gigantic that was going to lead to a massive future, the Billy Idol. I mean, it was kind of a fun joke name. Even the name was like, it was going to be IDLE, but then I realized, there's, Eric Idle in Monty Python. It's his real name. So it was like, I had to sort of tell Caroline Coon of Sounds, because we were the Bromley contingent. We followed the Sex Pistols. She was doing an article. And she said, well, who
She was a journalist writing about you.
I said, well, I have been Billy IDLE, but there's Eric Idle. So she said, well, you got 24 hours to think about it. So when 24 hours went by, I said, I'll be Billy IDOL, Because there was a guy in the Dolls, Billy Doll, and I thought, it's a bit like that, Billy Idol, Billy, I'm like Billy Doll, But it was just a fun, stupid name, really, and you never thought you're going to have to live with it the rest of your life, not really, I mean, but, it was just, but look, it was more right for the 80s than it was the 70s, that's what I found out.
Yeah, because you were born, I should mention, for people that don't know, you were born William Michael Albert Broad, and so you became Billy Idol, IDOL. I read a story that maybe it's apocryphal, but that one of your teachers in school used to call you Billy Idol, IDLE, because he felt you were lazy in school.
Yes, he wrote in capital letters on my third form end of the year report. William is ID, capital letter, IDL, my dad's going to IDLE, my dad's going to kill me, And I'd also got like 10 out of 100 for chemistry, 14 out of 100 for Latin, 14 out of 100 for physics. I mean, it was like my dad's going to, let alone, then the teacher writes in full, because in those days they wrote in longhand cursive. But he wrote in capital printed letters. They didn't do that. Shit.
That meant you were in real trouble.
So, yeah, Bill Price's name was. I can still remember the chemistry teacher's name, Bill Price.
May he rest in peace.
Well, yeah, he might still be alive. I wonder if he
might be.
What if he knows that he named me in a weird way?
That he inspired a rock legend. Billy, you become Billy Idol in 1976, and Generation X. I mean, you guys got a recording contract with Chrysalis in '76. I mean, you were not a massive band, but you were not an insignificant act. I mean, do you remember? Were your parents proud of you? They were like, "Oh my God, our son who dropped out of college, he's just got a recording contract." Do you remember any reaction from them at the time?
They were horrified at first because I actually was telling them full on, I'm not going back to. I've only been at university a year, I'd just done the first year, so I was saying to them straight out, I'm going to leave. I'm leaving university and I'm joining a punk rock group, and I don't think they knew what a rock and roll group was, but I don't think they knew what a punk rock group was. So you imagine they don't even know what I'm talking about. And then, so the sheer horror. Yeah. And then they just really were scared for me, really. They were just scared for me, is he destroying his life, and maybe, because we didn't, not that we didn't care, but, we were going to do this thing, whatever, that's the thing when we believed in it. And also, we could see what was happening, that once the Pistols went kaboom and then the Clash and everything, it just took off in England. It never took off in America, punk rock. Never really took off. Ramones never got really big in America. They're kind of big on the indie stations and that, but they were huge in England. And so who was massive even first was Devo, because they had a number one with Satisfaction. They were huge. Yeah. So punk rock just took off in England. So we went from wow, we didn't think there was a future in this thing to now every record company in England wanted their own punk rock group. And so we went from nobody giving a shit to the powers that be wanting, all the record companies wanted their own punk rock group. That's just what happened. So you could even choose. We even held off for a year. We could have even held off for longer. We could have held off for 2 years. In fact, maybe that's what we should have done, but we held off for about a year and then we signed a deal, and we got exactly what we were looking for, a deal with an independent record company. So, punk opened these kind of doorways that that led to a sort of freedom even inside the system.
We'll be right back with Billy Idol after a quick break. Stay with us. I'm Guy Raz, and you're listening to The Great Creators. Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz. Let's get back to my conversation with Billy Idol. Billy, I'm curious about how your music evolved, even in those early days, because Johnny Rotten was, he wasn't shouting, but he wasn't quite singing. It wasn't necessarily melodic. And even your early music, Kiss Me Deadly, your approach to punk was very different. I mean, it was punk, but it was very musical, and it was very there was melody into it. And you were criticized for that from the punk scene because that was what you were sounding like. But how did you develop that kind of sound?
The thing is, I believe that people like David Bowie or Lou Reed or the people in punk who were in punk and say that in the 60s or then the New York Dolls and then later on the Ramones, they're all telling you, find out who you are and be it. So even though I love the Pistols, I wasn't going to copy Johnny Rotten, singing. You just work. You're going to find out who you were. And also that was the other thing. You knew right from the start, just full-on copying someone, you're not going to get anywhere. You had to find out who you were, and that's what we sort of were doing, even by writing the songs, and even finding the name of the group and everything. It was all to create our own thing that was just as powerful in its own way, but it was very much true to us. That's what the Clash were doing. We're watching the Clash. I mean, Mick Jones didn't sing like Johnny Rotten. He didn't play guitar like Jonesy. Mick Jones of the Clash. It was quite different. The Clash, all the punk groups were very different. I mean, the Clash were different to Susan the Banshees. Susan the Banshees were nothing like Generation X. Generation X, nothing like the Buzzcocks. Buzzcocks are nothing like Devo. If you think about
Stranglers.
The first wave of punk,
new wave,
we weren't alike. We weren't copying each other. We were sort of we were vibing off what was going on, but we weren't full on. And that was the mission. The mission was to find out who you are and be it. And that you had to find out who you were as a singer, as a songwriter, as a musician, everything.
It's so interesting that you mentioned David Bowie because, I was a kid when your music came out, and it was a huge part of my childhood. And I just, in the last couple of days, been listening to a lot of your music and was listening to Hot in the City. And wow, because that's a really early song of yours as a solo artist. And you can hear so much. It's almost like an homage to David Bowie. I hear you, just your love for David Bowie in that song. Am I mishearing that?
Well, no. Of course, I loved Bowie. I mean, we grew up with him. He was like our shine. He was like a beacon of light to us. Yeah. Just even changing his image and proclaiming he's gay when he probably wasn't completely. I was kind of wild. It was fun. He made things fun in the 70s because 70s were really kind of boring. There's a lot of crap going on. That's why we started punk in the first place. Because there was sweet fuck all going on in England. Except for David Bowie, and even he buggered off to America. So we were sort of kids, the children of David Bowie, doing our own thing,
When Generation X split up, you decided to move to America in '81. And what were your prospects? I mean, were there people who sort of said to you, hey, Billy, you've got something. Generation X is fine, but you really have a talent and you should go pursue a solo career because you can really make it. Was that the message you were getting?
Well, yeah, but by the time I was coming to America, 5 years had gone by, and 5 years of really learning the job, really, in a way. That's really what I was doing in those 5 years in England. Finding out how to record music, how to write music, how to sing music, finding out who I was, but then also gradually learning how to record, getting better at it, and then really sort of steering where you wanted to go musically, but the record company by that time, were saying, well, you've kind of done it here. What about, because they knew I was going to go solo. And they kind of said, well, you've done it here, really. What about going to the States? And of course, to me, I was like, great. That's what I've been trying to do just anyway, just get to America in lots of ways. And the first kind of thing of punk was kind of dying out in lots of ways. By 1981, there was... it was really the record. But I also, by that time, had an American manager. Bill O'Coin was already managing Generation X.
And he had managed Kiss, I think, right?
He knew, and also he kind of knew that there was a 24-hour music channel coming in America, which I would be perfect for.
Yes.
The MTV. Wow. He kind of knew about it because he had links to television. Bill O'Coin had come out of television in the 60s and then had managed Kiss and then started managing Generation X, and then he carried on managing me. And so I had links to America, and also the record company was saying, well, why not go somewhere else to kind of reignite your career? And I knew if I stayed in England, you'd end up sort of propping up a bar, really, and most people thinking you're a has-been. It's just the way it would, because things move through England really fast, Britain really fast, music styles and fashions, whereas in America things hang around a lot longer, they just do. So you kind of knew that I knew definitely if I stayed in England and tried to sort of reignite my career as Billy Idol solo, it was a much better idea to go somewhere else. And what better place to go than New York, go to America, New York.
Yeah.
Because that's where punk rock had come from initially, anyway. A lot of great music had come out of England. You just knew, out of New York, you just knew you're going to find someone there, a like-minded person. And then, of course, Bill O'Coin knew Steve Stevens. That was the other thing, that Bill had known Steve and had been supporting Steve. And so really he put us two together, which was like, there you go. That's what I was looking for. I need an incredible guitarist. Yeah. That's one thing David Bowie teaches you too. He always had an incredible guitarist, like Mick Ronson and then Earl Slick or, whoever it was. He always had an incredible lead guitarist. So you kind of...
So Bill brought you and Steve Stevens together?
Yeah, he did. I was looking at other people, but once I met Steve and really realised how good Steve was, I realised, man, I found the guy. I found the guy who can do whatever I want,
It's interesting. A lot of people probably would be surprised to hear this, but when you released Dancing with Myself and Moni Moni in 1981, they did not chart. Neither of those songs charted at all. They were not hits.
No, but where they were
initially
hits there was this New York, there was kind of a new wave dance chart in New York. And like places like Danceteria, they were playing Dancing with Myself for like 20 minutes to half an hour. And people just danced to it for like half an hour. It's like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, because I'd gone to America thinking, well, who is Billy Idol? I don't really know. I knew Billy Idol was in Generation X, but who is? But of course, once I got to America and I went to this club, Hurrahs, and I realized, the DJ put Dancing with Myself on, and then the people were all round the bar. They're around the bar getting a drink, and then the next minute, this DJ put this song on, and they all left the bar and went there was all these tables and chairs and settees and lounge chairs, and they pushed them over, and the next minute they're all going crazy on the dance floor. And I thought to myself, well, great, now I can get a screwdriver. Excuse me, Matt, can I have the screwdriver? By the time I got the drink, I thought, right, wonder what that song was that they all went crazy. And then I listened and I went, oh, fuck me stiff. It's Dancing with Myself. And I just knew, this is all I've got to do. I've just got to follow this up in this new wave dance chart. So that's why I did Moni Moni, really. It was just to find another song to keep this dance chart thing going, because that's what was in the clubs and everything. And a lot of the new music coming out of England, even I'd sort of in the last Generation X album straightened out the beats we were using. They're more danceable. And I was thinking about that anyway, because I suppose I was just picking up on what was starting to happen in England anyway, and we kind of imported it into America. The idea of rock dance music, of new wave punk dance music, this is the way it could continue. And there are other groups like the Simple Minds and people like that in England, or even Joy Division, had a very straight beats and things. And but anyway, that's really what I was doing. I realized, I just need to follow up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we started to think about an album, writing songs that people would listen to. And that's where I did something like Hot in the City. I think that's the first song I tried to write.
First song and the first song that
and for me, it sounds a bit
Springsteen
to me. It's like Fire.
Yeah, it does.
Ding,
it sounds like David Bowie meets Springsteen. Yeah.
I was really ripping Springsteen off, really. And thinking, I was going through the first, summer that I'd lived in New York, where it's just insanely humid, so... And I was walking around like I was in the Warriors, I see they filmed the Warriors, I just wore like my like leather cut off, no t-shirt. It was so fucking hot. And I just thought, man, it's hot here. And by the way, I'm hot, I'm hot in the city. It's silly, but that's kind of, it was that simple.
It's also such a different kind of, like, there's an urgency in Dancing with Myself. Like, you can hear the punk roots of that song, and Hot in the City is a completely different kind of song. And I wonder, it's a little bit of a digression, but I wonder about image, right? Like you said, I knew who I was in Generation X, and I was trying to figure out who I was as Billy Idol. So to explain that to me a little bit. I mean, you were a guy.
Well, you see, when I heard that song, though, when I heard the DJ playing Dancing with Myself, it answered. I know who Billy Idol is. He's the guy who did Dancing with Myself. He's the guy... Because that's what I wanted to do. It was my idea to do music like Dancing with Myself, that it had this straight beat and very simple chords and danceable as well. And so you did, and then you just had to think. Also, I just had to think of my love of rock and roll, and sort of put it all together. I liked soul music. I liked a lot of soul music. I liked rhythm and blues. I like punk. Let's somehow put it all together. I like some techno music. That's why I was working with Keith Forsey in lots of ways, because he was a drummer who was working with, I can't remember anybody's name anymore. He's a guy who did I Feel Love, But yeah, he'd worked with Giorgio Moroder. Keith had worked with Giorgio Moroder in Germany and was his drummer. He was really the guy playing the drums and all the Donna Summer tracks. He even wrote songs for Donna Summer. He'd written Hot Stuff for I think he wrote the lyrics. And then he'd written Flashdance What a Feeling lyrics and got an Oscar. He won an Oscar.
Good track. Wow.
But he was looking to be a producer, really. And then Bill O'Coin, when I said to Bill O'Coin one day, I said, look, what we really need is a rock and roll dance disco, I said, for want of a better word, producer. And he went to Giorgio Moroder. Giorgio didn't want to do it, but Keith wanted to do it. So that's why we worked with Keith Forsey on the last Generation X album, which really in some ways is like the first Billy Idol solo album, because it starts having the triumvirate of me and Keith, and then later on it's going to be Steve Stevens. At that time it was Tony James, but there was a 3-man team putting the album together. So that's the thing. I knew, even though I was kind of at first in New York wondering who is Billy Idol, once I saw they were into Dancing with Myself, I knew all I've got to do is get Keith Forsey. I just got to figure out some kind of follow-up to it. And that's why I did Mony Mony, because I knew it was kind of a drum song. I knew we could do that easily. And I said to Keith, what about doing Mony Mony? And he said, oh, fantastic. Come out here to LA. I'll put a band together and we'll record, and I had Hot in the City. I'd played him. So he said, we'll record Hot in the City. We'll do Dance with Myself. And there was another song, Untouchables, we redid. And then I wrote another one quickly while I was out in LA, Baby Talk. So because the record company was saying, an American record company, Chrysalis, was saying, why don't you put out an EP? The Pretenders had just put out an EP. And it's a great way to sort of, instead of an album, let's put out an EP and just sort of introduce yourself. And of course, we put Dancing with Myself on the EP.
I think it was Don't Stop, right?
Don't Stop. And we held back Hot in the City because the guy from the record company said, it's too good. That's a single. It's too good for the EP. Let's hold it back for the album. So, hook or by crook, somehow I was now... I knew who Billy Idol was. I'd started to find... I really knew. I knew who he was. Once I Once I saw the reaction to Dance With Myself, I knew who Billy Idol was.
Yeah.
After that, it was just, I've just got to be it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, you were scary a little bit, because you had this punk hair and you wore chains and earrings and you had like spikes everywhere and there was a fierceness in your curled lip and it was a little scary. I remember and some of your videos were scary. How important was it? I mean, how much did you think about the image you were cultivating, about who you wanted to be as an MTV visual star, in addition to being, making music that people liked?
I don't know. It's funny, really. You just kind of, it was all kind of, you're kind of doing things as it happened, and you just sort of were almost finding out, as I say, you're kind of finding out who you were just by doing things, by writing songs, by, all right, we're going to do videos. Okay, I'm going to come up with the basic vibe of the video, whether I came up with the whole thing or not. And that's why I say I'm wearing crosses. Because I was walking around New York, I had no money. But, all those Catholic stores, I was passing all those Catholic stores with all the cheap rosaries. So I just started to put things around my neck, And then next minute, someone would give me something, or someone out of the audience would give me some kind of, thing and I just started to put more and more shit around my neck. And it was all kind of just coming out of a DIY, do-it-yourself punk rock ethic. We're still living, thinking that way, and just sort of bringing that to America in some ways. And then kind of like, that's it, just making sure that I was presenting the vibe of what I wanted to do, so that at least the people around me got it from me. It wasn't someone else coming up with the ideas. And then White Wedding, it was like, the video, I'd really seen, I had this kind of horror book of old, silent and early kind of universal horror, the Frankenstein and everything. And there was lots of Boris Karloff films where he was either in the silent movie or, say, The Black Cat, where it's like he's a priest with an altar and behind him are these white crosses. So there was things in silent movies or those early 30s movies that you knew, man, I can take some of that imagery. Because everything they were doing was wooden glue and paint, things like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's the basic psychotic background to his mind is just somebody's painted. It's like they're almost making videos, really. Like they got zero money, so they're just using what they could. And I thought about all of that, and I thought that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some of these horror things, going to take some of this imagery that I like, and then it's all wooden glue and paste. Why not? So, so when we did White Wedding, let's have basically an altar with crosses everywhere. And because I probably showed him the picture of this, of Boris Karloff. I probably showed the director, David Mallet, the picture of this Boris Karloff Black Cat or whatever it is, where he's this black altar with these white crosses behind him, I don't know, and he looks insane, And so I just would take bits and pieces out of imagery that I liked, really, and put it into the videos, but surround me with it. And like Eyes Without a Face video is kind of me a little bit. I showed David Mallet, let's do a bit of a Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in a way, a little bit of a psychotic, because the guy in Eyes Without a Face he's like, it's almost like a murdering love song, So
yeah. We're talking now 40 years after the release of Rebel Yell, and it's amazing. That record had originally 9 tracks on it. 4 of those 9 tracks charted: Rebel Yell, Eyes Without a Face, Flesh for Fantasy, Catch My Fall. I mean, these dominated MTV at the time, and I'm curious to get a sense of your discipline at the time. I mean, this was not a great sort of personal time in your life. You were a substance abuser, but you also were incredibly prolific. You were writing not just a lot of music, but really successful music. How are you doing that, given that your personal life was kind of, let's say not the greatest?
Well, really, I was carrying on doing what I'd done in Generation X, really, except now I'm writing the lyrics as well, because Tony used to write the lyrics in Generation X and I wrote the music. So now I'm just carrying on writing, my own music, and now I'm, sort of forcing myself to write lyrics, really, which half the time they're kind of, I don't know if they're all that good, really, but it didn't really matter. What mattered was I had enough of it so that I could cement the idea of Billy Idol on people. That's kind of what so as long as I seemed to be getting somewhere, and as I say, I had done 5 years in England where I was almost learning how to do everything. Now I was implementing all the things I'd learnt and going beyond punk rock in a way. That's the other thing. I didn't just think, I was thinking beyond punk now. I'm thinking what I want to, it's truly Billy Idol music. That's what I was thinking. Just like Chuck Berry had Chuck Berry music and there was Beatle music, there's going to be Billy Idol music. So I was thinking like that. And also I just believed I'd grown up with albums that people went all over the musical map. I mean, say the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, it doesn't really matter who. Even the Ramones, they didn't just, it sounds as if they're playing everything, but actually they went all over a musical map in lots of ways. And a lot of groups that I loved did that. Look at The Clash. I mean, their albums are like that. They're just like, whoa, they do everything. Surf music, they do, blues, they do reggae, they just like, it's a little bit like we all grew up with very, eclectic albums. So once I was really doing my own music, I just thought beyond the punk rock thing, and I just went with what I liked, what suited my voice as well. That's the other thing. I was finding out about my voice, and in Generation X, I hadn't quite realised the low tones I've got, but in Billy Idol, I really discovered the low tones that I have, and I could use those, and it gave me a whole other place to go singing, which meant there's a whole other place for this Billy Idol solo music to exist, this whole other voice that I didn't really use in Generation X. I didn't know I had it, And I discovered, the crooning voice, which maybe some people made fun of it, but it made me different, It made me different, and it gave me a ballad voice, and I also had a rock voice, So you went beyond punk, really, and it just meant I could sing about more things that were more true to me, really, as a person, because in Generation X I was singing Tony's lyrics a lot, and this is now me singing my own lyrics, and kind of enjoying that as well. I was enjoying finding out what I cared about, it was all kind of mining yourself too. But of course we'd grown up through the 60s and 70s, dreaming of these moments, dreaming if this could happen, what you do. Not that it was all prepared or anything, but there was a little bit like it was a massive release of like, I've got stuff stored up, which started to come out, I think. And I think that's what you're watching. That's what you were watching in the 80s. It's really me discovering myself and also discovering where I could go with my voice, where I could go with my musicianship. And I'm not the greatest musician, but just shows you what you can do if you believe in yourself.
Stay with us. We'll have more with Billy Idol right after this break. I'm Guy Raz, and you're listening to The Great Creators. Hey, welcome back to The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz. Here's more of my conversation with Billy Idol. You were, I think, fair to say, not always healthy, right? You were drinking a lot, using drugs.
Yes, become a heroin addict.
Would you say you were happy during that time in your life, or no?
Yeah, I was happy. I was getting somewhere with the thing I loved. Also, too, we'd embraced drugs as teenagers, so...
Yeah.
And funnily enough, drugs can help you to focus. I mean, that's one of the things I think, if you're just maintaining on heroin, it actually it helps you to focus. It didn't stop me writing music. That was the thing. It didn't. In fact, if anything, you kind of get into your own. It's very womb-like, heroin. So you get into kind of your own space. I mean, like people like Keith Richards. All he ever did was make mixtapes all the time. All you think about is music, because that's the thing you love. So all you're doing for hours on end is playing music, making mixtapes, trying to write a song, and then listening to somebody else's album. Listen to the latest Gun Club or whoever it is, and going, man, that's fucking great. And what am I going to do? And in some ways, the drugs the honeymoon period of the drugs didn't stop you writing music. But yeah, I mean, you're pretty normal when you're just not high on heroin. When you're just maintaining, you're very normal. You're just like, it's just you. You're just avoiding being sick is what you're doing. You take a little bit so you're not sick. And then at night time, you might do a bit more of a big line, so you actually do nod out and stuff. But a lot of times you're kind of maintaining. And when you're like that, you're just a normal person. It was just... the other thing too is I had this kind of space I had to fill, a musical space. I had mentally, there was a record that was always there with 9 tracks or 11 tracks or whatever that needed to be filled in. So I just carried on doing what I'd done in Generation X, which was like, when I got an idea, I just tried to put some lyrics to it. Or, I went to a party with the Rolling Stones, and they were all drinking this Southern Sour Mash. I didn't know what it was. They had these dark bottles in their hands. In front of me was Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and Mick Jagger. I don't know whose birthday party. It must have been one of those guys' birthday. I can't remember. Is that Ronnie Wood's Brownstone? And they were drinking this stuff. They kept and then I followed the label up to their mouths, because I was going, wonder what it is they're drinking. And I could see, there's a rebel officer on it. And I kind of knew, I'm into history. I'm into American history. I love it. So I knew about the Civil War. And I went, so it's a kind of like a Jeb Stuart guy on that bottle. So I said to them, what is this stuff? Did you have it made up? They went, no, it's a Southern Sour Mash. It's called Rebel Yell. It's from Tennessee. And I went, Rebel Yell. I said, are you guys going to use that as a title? I mean, they kind of started to look at each other, and I was going to hope they're not going to use it. And I kind of said out loud, I kind of went, well, Street Fighting Man, Jumping Jack Flash, Rebel Yell. Does that sound like a Stones? And they kind of went, no, I don't think we will use it. And I went, right. I'm going home right now. I've got a title. I'm just going to not make it about the Civil War. I'll make it a cry of love, a female orgasmic cry of love. And I went home, and next day I probably started to write it, and got a verse. Last night a little dancer came a dancer. That's Perry Lister. I was in love with her, and she was a dancer. So let's sing about Perry, about our relationship, really.
She was your partner at the time.
And then. Yeah, in the midnight hour, it's an orgasmic cry of love. She cries more, more, more. And so you kind of bounce off things. And then you can imagine if once you've got a song like Rebel Yell, you start going, well, what's the other side, flip side to Rebel Yell? Well, it's some kind of really slow ballad. Well, I really like reggae. So let's make it a slow ballad that's got the heaviest bass line in the world. And let's make it not a love song, but some sort of sick murder love song, so that's Eyes Without a Face, and so you just start bouncing off yourself. And then later on, Flesh for Fantasy was kind of like, all right, we've got like we started off writing it as a punk rock song initially, but then after a while we started to realize Flesh, because I saw this movie, Flesh or Fantasy was the name of this 40s movie, and I thought, well, it's Flesh for Fantasy. And I bounced off that, and then we started off writing it like a punk rock song, but then after a while we started to go, but the title Flesh for Fantasy should be sexy. So then we slowed it right down and turned it into a groover, because we'd probably done Eyes Without a Face, and we're starting to go, the low bass, let's keep that sort of idea. So you kind of just keep bouncing off yourself.
By the way, that whiskey, Rebel Yell, is not made anymore under that label. It's not called Rebel. I think in 2020 they changed it because Rebel Yell, of course, there was associations with the Civil War and the Confederacy, and so they changed the name. But I didn't know that story, that it literally came from
They were drinking it. They each had a bottle. The Stones were drinking it. They're crazy. I did a photo shoot where I was sort of stood on 1 million bottles of Rebel Yell. So when it was over, me and the lady second, we started to drink one of these bottles. And after about half an hour, I had the worst hangover. And you got like a third of the way through that. It was the worst hangover I'd ever had. I had to go back to my apartment and have 2 lines of heroin till I felt better. So I went, how the fuck are they drinking that stuff,
Well, how the hell were you? I mean, today, musicians, rock and roll stars, they travel with like personal trainers on the road. Like Taylor Swift is very disciplined. Like this was a different time. Rock and roll was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that was a big part of it. How did you maintain that life? I mean, how were you able? Because it on the one hand, it sounds like it helped you creatively, but on the other hand, clearly you stopped using because you would have been dead at a certain point.
Well, you kind of know you can only do stuff like that for a certain amount. I did anyway. That's something in my mind. My mother was a nurse, and you kind of know that you can't do things forever. For some reason I knew, man, you can't do this forever. There's a certain amount of time you can do it. So maybe that's what saved me, because somewhere I knew you cannot stay addicted to it. You have to get off it. But I spent a good 10 years, kind of living a drug lifestyle and kind of enjoying it in some ways, because, I don't know, we'd grown up with drugs. We were, as teenagers, we'd grown up smoking hash and then taking Secanols and Turanols, and then later on Mandrax. And then kind of acid. We took quite a lot of acid. I used to do that's kind of what we were doing. And then because it sort of wasn't the next step is heroin kind of thing. And so it's almost like par for the course in some ways. I wasn't shooting up. Let's just tell people that, because that's part of what saved me probably, because my mother being a nurse, I just didn't like the idea of shooting up, so I was a snorter really, which is it's just as addictive, but really actually the needle is even there's a power of 10 to that. So maybe that's what saved me. I didn't go the whole way in some ways, because it's an element of me that I didn't need to. I was getting high enough on snorting it really. So, but yeah. I was living this kind of full-on rock and roll lifestyle and enjoying it, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about how it helped you concentrate. I mean, I don't want to – I hope this conversation –
I know it's frightening, because I know other people will go, you shouldn't be saying that. But that is what happened. I mean, it wasn't stopping me writing songs. If anything, like I say, when you're maintaining it, probably helped me focus a little bit. But then it wasn't like I was only doing what I'd been doing for the last 5 years anyway. It was like that's all we were doing. And Generation X was like Tony would come up with some lyrics or a title, or with Dancing with Myself. We were in Japan, and we went to this sort of Saturday Night Fever kind of. It was 1978 when we were in Japan, and it was still Saturday Night Fever. They were all dressing like John Travolta, But then I said to Tony, I said, "Hey, look, Tone. They're not dancing with each other. They're dancing to their own reflections. They're dancing with themselves." And Tony went, "They're dancing with themselves. That could be a good title." So later on, when we got back to England, one night I went out and I was coming to the studio one morning, and I got there early, and Tony wasn't there. No one was there. But I remembered, that title, that Dancing with Myself title. So I started to play my guitar, and by the time Tony turned up at the studio, I had I had the tune, I had the da-da-da, and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, dancing with myself. And then I said to Tone, I've got a tune for that song, that title, Dancing with Myself. And he said, well, I've got some of the words. So I went, oh, fucking great. And then we finished the words off together. But that's just what we were doing. So I was I was doing that myself, I was kind of doing that to myself. Right, I've got this bit of a tune I need a bit of I'll find a title for it, and then you put it together, Like, Flesh for Fantasy. I need, there's a film, Flesh or Fantasy. Well, Flesh for Fantasy would be the title for me, sort of thing. So, and then start writing something simple like Catch My Fall, which was on the Rebel Yell album, was really like, how long will I really exist like this? How long will I stay, successful or something? You're going to see me fall as well. And you say, even as you're being successful, you're singing about, I can see a point where it won't carry on, kind of thing, so Catch My Fall, you could think of that as a sexual thing too, catch my fall kind of thing. So I was thinking that in a double way, but really it was almost sort of saying to people, one day I won't be able, I'll have to get off this stuff and I'll probably have to disappear for a bit. And that's kind of what happened.
We're talking, as I mentioned, 40 years after the release of this record. And tell me how people react to you when they see you. I mean, I mentioned, how meaningful and important these songs were for me. What do people say when they meet you? Do they sing the songs back to you? How do people respond? How have they responded over the years to this record?
Yeah, I mean, that's just as they do. Yeah, of course, there's people shouting at me, Rebel Yell, more, or White Wedding. I mean, I used to go through Washington Square, the park in New York, and the drug dealers would be going, well, I've got that White Wedding crack. I've got that, Mony marijuana. I've got, because they see me coming, so they sort of start calling the drugs the names of my songs. So, yeah, and then, like I say, there was a point where I was watching people dance with myself for half an hour at a time, and the DJ puts it on a few times a night. So you're watching people dance for an hour and a half or something, kind of go, wow. So you're kind of watching the reaction to it. You saw how people reacted to it. And then as we played more, we started to play in clubs. I think on the Rebel Yell, White Wedding was clubs kind of thing, and then maybe small theatres. And then with Rebel Yell, it started off in clubs, small theatres, and the next minute we were in arenas. And by the end of the tour, we were in arenas, So clubs, small theatres, arenas. By halfway, by the time Eyes Without a Face and stuff had hit, we were starting to play arenas. So yeah, it just really exploded. And at the same time, the videos are on MTV, and I think Eyes Without a Face was getting maximum play, and everything was successful. Everything was working.
As you sort of, and you've written about this in your book, that in 1994 that was really a breaking point for you because you almost died from a drug overdose, and you had to get your life together, right? And you did. How did it affect your ability, do you think, as a musician? Because you continued and continue to write and perform and produce. Do you feel like actually you were able to learn how to become a better musician, performer, writer after that period of time?
Well, I'm not the greatest singer. That's one of the things I knew. I'm just not. I mean, I was learning. I found over time that I've got better. And I can see. I see. If you keep working your instrument, it gets better. But I didn't really know that back then. I just was dealing with what I'd got. Really, I wasn't the greatest singer or anything like that. But I'd found a way I could be a singer, if you see what I mean. And, I mean, I didn't get off drugs. I mean, I didn't, I just would swap one drug for another. I'm not on heroin while I'm on the road, so I'm going to drink. I'd drink myself stupid and take blow or something, and smoke tons of marijuana. And then when I got back home, I'd go back on, old Perry would send me methadone through, when I was on Rebel Yell tour, she'd send me some methadone through the post. So every now and again, I'd get a bit of because I was jonesing really badly on the Rebel Yell tour. I mean, I felt terrible, but, that's how I was dealing with it. I would just overload on something else. And then, so I never really got off it. In fact, it got worse. I mean, 1986, I spent a whole year on it, seriously on it, and then frightened to death of getting off it. And then I sort of, but I had to get off it to go on the road, So I didn't want to be on the road searching for drugs somehow. I don't know. So that's what I was doing. It was horrible as well because I was always going through these I had to get off it. And then I discovered if you smoke coke, you don't feel the withdrawal from heroin. So then I became a full-on coke smoker, which was the worst possible thing I could have done. So if you're listening to this, people out there, don't do what I've done, for fuck's sake, because it's a totally mistake. Don't do it. I mean, I was, eventually I had a motorcycle accident in 1990, and I was in hospital for a month with a messed up leg, where I had a whole piece missing from my leg, which they managed to fix. And I was on morphine, on the most purest, strongest morphine. And after that, I said to myself, man, when are you ever going to be that high again? And then I was able to put it in the rear view mirror after that. I was lucky that I could do that, really. But I was able to come to a sort of an agreement with myself, man, you've done it. You've done it to death. You can't keep on doing it. You've got to get away from it, or it will destroy you. It's destroying you, really. You've got to get away from it. So I did. I somehow got away from it.
You and Perry Lister, you were never married, but you had a son, Willem, who is still your son.
Yes.
And tell me about. I mean, assuming now, years later, you probably have a pretty good relationship with Perry Lister, or maybe occasionally see her.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yes, obviously we didn't stay together forever. I mean, I think we broke up when he was a year or something, because I was still a bit of a drug addict, and it wasn't until about 1993 or so I really started to put things in the, and then I would fall off the wagon every now and again, but I never went back onto heroin, I would smoke coke or something when I fell off the wagon. But gradually, over 10 years or something, gradually, bit by bit, I did go to AA for a bit, and stuff like. We did go to a rehab for about 5 days, and then I couldn't stand it. But but gradually, I did put a brake on myself, and then I started to make. Like if the Cyberpunk record, I didn't make that fucked up. I probably just smoked some pot.
Yeah. That's a record that came out, I think, in 93 or 94,
yes.
Yeah. Billy, tell me about touring today. Right? You perform, you're on the road. I know you're performing a big show in Portland in a couple months after this interview. And it's different when you're 68, right? Getting up there and belting it out for 2 hours than it is when you're 28. But tell me what it's like for you now to go out there and to perform some of these songs, or many of these songs.
Well, one thing about me is I'm a bit of a nut, but, for instance, when I moved to Los Angeles in 1987, I started to work. I wanted to ride motorcycles, you see, because, this is the perfect place to ride Harley Davidsons and whatever motorcycles. It's just the perfect place. So I wanted to, I was a skinny drug addict, so, I wanted to buff myself up. So I started to work out. And so there's a side to me that isn't just destroying himself. There's a big part of me that is self-sabotage, but there's just as much a part of me that's preserving himself. And so, once that helped a lot. The discipline of working out four days a week, I carried on doing that for 25 years. I still work out 3 days now. I do 3 days, but actually the amount of workout I do is 4 days. I just changed up from weights. I used to do weights for 25 years. I did weights, and then I started to do Pilates, TRX, and some weights. I changed up there because it's like strengthening and stretching, with Pilates. It's very like yoga, really.
Yeah.
And so I've always thought. There's a part of me destroying myself, and there's a part of me
preserving
myself.
Yes.
It's crazy. No one would understand that. That's why I'm not a regular drug addict as well. That's the other thing. I'm not. I can drink a little bit of alcohol. I don't have to. I can stop. I can say no to coke and stuff. If obviously there's a part of me that would love to be doing all of that, but there's another part of me that knows you did your time. You did your time. And it's ever since 1999 I've gone on stage sober. I don't think go on. I haven't gone on. I don't drink or anything. You know, in the old days, I used to have a bar on stage. You know, behind me. You know, it'd be like there'd be yeah, it'd be a full, not a full bar, but you know what I mean? I'd have like whiskey, I'd have a beer, I'd have like, halfway through the show, I always did a massive tumbler of vodka and orange, you know. So I bet the audience were like, oh my God, he's just absolutely, you know, my eyes were like, you know, he's changed completely in a second, you know. But that was just in the 80s, you know, we didn't have in-ear monitors and stuff. We were using the monitors on the stage. You could never hear yourself. I couldn't never hear myself because I don't sing above the music. So part of it was I can't hear myself anyway. Fuck it, who cares? But once I got the in-ear technology and we were getting, and I was also starting to put drugs in the rear view mirror. Then I started to, you know, I was working out on the road. I was not getting high when I was going on stage. I was taking it so I can hear myself. So I'm really working my voice. That's what started to happen 24 years ago, if you see what I mean. And so, yeah, there's a big part of me, there's a part of me that's destroying himself, but there's a big part of me that's building himself back up. You know? So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's crazy in a way. It's daft. I don't know. I am a little bit of a nut, I've got to admit. You know?
I'm just curious, when you see that 28, 27-year-old kid singing Dancing with Myself, you know, when you see him, and that curled lip, and he was so thin, you know, and you still look good now. But I mean, you know, this lanky guy with the spiky hair, this kid, do you see you in there? Do you feel like you're a different person today, or do you see him and say, that is the same person who I am?
Yeah, really, I'm the same person. It's just, I'm 68 years old instead of 28, 29. But yeah, no, still, obviously, I was a young chap with all the energy and drive that you have, you know, and also I was doing what I loved as well. That's the thing. I was succeeding at doing what I loved, and that Rebel Yell album in particular was really me cementing my place with America, you know, in terms of sort of really sort of planting my flag here. And I mean, I'm obviously not that young chap anymore, but I am still him, you know, in a way, you know, I am still him. It's just,
You're
I'm
still
just
him.
68 years old instead of 28. You know?
Yeah.
So it's 40 more years, 40 years later. But yeah, I still believe in bringing the energy and, you know, on stage, and I still believe in what we're doing, and just the same as I did back then. So there's lots of things about me that there's touchstone things that I do that aren't so different in a way, you know.
Yeah.
And we're still with this new album. We're making a new album, the Dream Into It album we're making, and that's full of energy. It's actually a youthful sounding album. So, you know, we still believe in the music we were making. It isn't so different, you know, really from what we did before.
Yeah. I mean, it's also kind of it's got to be kind of incredibly gratifying, right? To be able to sell out huge venues still at this point in your life and career. Like, you know, Madonna is doing a global tour, and you know, she's selling out these venues, and people want to hear, if you want to hear your music. I mean, there's 15 songs easily of yours that everybody knows all the words to, you know. So you talk about Catch My Fall as a song about, you know, well, this can all collapse at some point and I might be irrelevant, and here you are still relevant at this phase in your life and career, which has to be kind of amazing. I mean, you can't plan for that.
No, I mean, it's touch and go that I'm still here as well. That's the other thing. But I am here, and I really care. And, you know, I've got people around me like Steve Stevens who really cares about what we're doing. I think that's the thing, you know, underneath it all, all the drugs, all the acting out or whatever, all the clothes or the hairstyles or whatever it is, underneath it all is this person who really cares, who really believes in what he's doing, who believes there's something great about it. There's something about it that's fundamental to us as people. It's fundamental to me anyway. And there's something about doing this that it set me free. That's what it did. By choosing this life, I set myself free. Otherwise, I would have worked for my dad, and it would have been a nightmare because he's a beautiful person, but don't try to work for him because he knows how he wants the job done, and you can never do it well enough for him. So he's a beautiful guy, but yeah, I had to. I couldn't have worked for him, so, I couldn't have worked for Dad. I had to do this, people. This is what I had to do in some ways. And I really care about it. I really care about music. I care about what I do so much that it's kept me alive.
I love it. Billy Idol, thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy.
That's Billy Idol. He's celebrating the 40th anniversary of Rebel Yell with a new expanded edition, and we'll link to it in the show notes at thegreatcreators.com/idol. And if you want to hear more interviews with rock legends like Johnny Marr of the Smiths, or Jeff Tweedy of Wilco, or Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills & Nash, just scroll down in your podcast feed or visit thegreatcreators.com/episodes. Thanks so much for listening to our show this week. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss a new episode. This episode was produced and edited by Kevin Leahy. Thanks also to Malia Agudelo and Kayla Rosenbaum. I'm Guy Raz, and you've been listening to The Great Creators from Built It Productions.